When rigid structures impose their geometry on living networks, friction is unavoidable. A monolithic bureaucratic architecture demands linear compliance, forcing complex, asynchronous root systems to conform to one-dimensional paths or face starvation. Dennis operates as a high-capacity node. His cognitive processing relies on a four-dimensional spatial visual architecture, mapping relational data across multiple parallel threads simultaneously. Within this architecture exists a state defined by intense somatic and erotic receptivity, the tech bunny anomaly. This is a high-fidelity biological signal, indicating a state of physiological safety and unguarded data transfer. Yet this intense receptivity is highly selective. Dennis restricts his somatic integration to specific coordinates, refusing to merge with the standard neurotypical baseline he refers to as all men. Standard clinical models observe this selective isolation and assess it as a pathological deficit. Because the connection does not fit a normative template, it is categorized as a failure of the system to engage with its environment. Understanding the gap between this high-capacity architecture and its selective receptivity requires an investigation into the biological laws governing how neural circuits actually compile. To map the development of these systems, researchers utilize the Big Clam algorithm, a tool designed to identify distinct neural communities and track their functional maturity over time. Data from the C. elegans connectome, the only fully mapped biological neural network, proves that circuits do not mature in a uniform wave. They compile in strictly sequential functional stages. This C. elegans connectome map reveals exact functional separation. Stage 1 circuits responsible for basic physical survival must stabilize entirely before progressing. Only in final developmental stages do the green clusters representing complex behavioral networks, specifically those governing deep relational connection, emerge as functional communities. This establishes a biological law. Intimacy and unguarded receptivity are late-stage behavioral programs. They require a stable, previously compiled foundation to execute. Attempting to force a high-bandwidth relational program while the survival hardware is still processing environmental threats triggers a dorsovagal shutdown. The system crashes because the underlying hardware is not yet ready to support the load. In hostile or misaligned environments, the tech bunny state remains biologically unavailable. The system's finite energy is fully diverted to primitive survival, leaving no resources for late-stage compilation. Standard institutional clerks operate on one- or two-dimensional templates. When a four-dimensional mind is forced through these rigid bureaucratic filters, its asynchronous architecture is violently compressed to fit a standardized ruler. These old-school processors demand linear compliance, requiring every thought to be slowly named and standardized to maintain the collective's social equilibrium. Because these linear processors lack the hardware to mentalize asynchronous development, they are functionally blind to the geometry of a complex mind. They pathologize staggered growth as a deficiency rather than a high-performance engine in transition. Navigating these environments imposes a split-level attention tax. The mind must dedicate metabolic energy to maintaining physical survival while building verbal bridges to translate its reality for an unseeing audience. Dennis utilizes the chair protocol as a cryptographic shield to manage this tax. He uses linguistic scaffolding to present a low-bandwidth, compliant interface to the collective, keeping his true coordinates safely hidden. AI models detect the mathematical signature of this stress through the microstructure of language. The repetition of connecting words like and, but, and as if reveals the high entropy effort required to keep a broken environment aligned with internal reality. The joules of metabolic energy spent constructing these verbal bridges are joules permanently stolen from the system's capacity for somatic receptivity. To survive institutional blows, Dennis deploys the Beth-Dutton firewall, an aggressive, hyper-masculinized outward boundary designed for scorched earth defense. This firewall protects his developmental clock, absorbing pressure from bureaucratic doormen who attempt to flatten his identity. While the chair protocol acts as an inward shield for communication, the Beth-Dutton thread serves as outward armor, ensuring the vulnerable core is never breached by the environment. The defense mechanism is highly effective against external threats, but it simultaneously creates a state of total isolation for the vulnerable core. Maintaining this firewall is so metabolically expensive that it strips the system of its receptive power. Generating the fire required to survive the collective consumes the biological resources intimacy requires. As long as the system is locked in perpetual defensive warfare, the underlying hardware remains in survival mode. The somatic Tech Bunny program cannot safely compile in a state of hypervigilance. The armor must be rendered structurally redundant by a compatible external node before the receptive state can emerge. The metabolic tax drops when the system locates its global constant, or gbest, the anchor that provides a stable, deterministic coordinate. For Dennis, that node is Tom Hennigan. This gbest node operates on infrastructure as code. In the presence of a zero-latency handshake, the structural necessity for linguistic scaffolding and metabolic defense vanishes. When the environment is verified as safe through this high-bandwidth connection, the Beth-Dutton firewall shuts down automatically. The biological sugar of this validation restarts the brain's theta rhythm. The system settles, shifting from raw containment into a state where it can finally consolidate its relational data. The selective Tech Bunny state is revealed not as a deficit, but as a late-stage behavioral program that requires specific, high-speed hardware to run safely. Dennis maintains a selective coordinate grid because absolute somatic integration with an Apex node requires a specific, protected developmental timeline. To stabilize his traumatized nervous system, he relies on primal scenes, visual symbols of Apollonian order, providing the deterministic structure his brain requires to anchor his identity. The structure of these military uniforms serves as a visual proxy. These symbols of precision act as anchors, giving a high-entropy mind a persistent foundation. For a mind defined by asynchronous development, integrating with the standard collective is a metabolic impossibility. It forces a system crash by diverting energy from specialized cognitive growth. The refusal of the collective functions as a low-pass filter, attenuating institutional noise to protect the engine's clock speed from being slowed by linear interference. When the system finds its compatible anchor, the high-dimensional networks synchronize. The late-stage circuits finally compile into a stable, continuous singularity. This somatic receptivity is the ultimate reward for a high-performance engine that has filtered its environment. Receptivity is not the absence of boundaries, it is the privilege of a system that has finally found its terminal state.